Welcome. Welcome to the Real Sports Podcast with your hosts, Dave Torromeo and John DeBenedictis. John, this is going to be a lot of fun. Welcome.
Oh, it's going to be so much fun. I'm glad we're finally doing this. We've been
Yeah.
talking about this, I think, for a year.
Yes.
So, better late than ever. But
Yeah. This is timeless stuff, man. This is timeless stuff. So,
it's amazing the great ideas that are born out of happy hour.
that's true. That's a good point. And I love the concept, which was yours, and do credit to you.
Thank
And
you.
and and I also love your first choice of a. Let's just explain. Why don't you explain to the audience what we're doing here?
Yeah, so as Dave already suggested, the podcast is the Real Sports Podcast. And if you don't see the imagery that we might be projecting, real is spelled REEL. And the podcast is going to be all about the beautiful marriage of sports and the motion picture. And what we're going to try to do over the course of God knows how many episodes is take a look back at some of the best and maybe not so best
Mm,
sports movies of all time. And God knows there's so many to choose from. And for me, it's really exciting because you know these days I don't really watch all that much in the way of sports or movies. But there was a time in my life when I was a kid, I watched so many different sports and sporting events, and then in my teens, 20s, 30s, I was a real movie buff. So this is kind of forcing me to go back and revisit things and
yeah.
jump into it, which I'm excited about. And listen, it's the tail end of winter. It's been a long winter.
Yeah.
We want to keep things timely, relevant, and we decided to kick it off with a hockey film, but I think a film that sort of transcends, Dave, just hockey.
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about here, and
Yes.
we are, of course, referring to the 2004 motion picture Miracle.
Miracle. And I think that your choice is impeccable for several reasons. One, we're just coming off this Four Nations tournament with which the USA just lost to, unfortunately lost to Canada in the final, and there was a lot of play for Miracle for the speech that Herb Brooks slash Kurt Russell played in that movie. We are also in the 45th just the other day. It was 45 years since that game was played. And unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember it. You're probably not.
We're close.
But I will say this, I mean, in terms of the movie, I mean, I think the movie is timeless. I think the movie, and now you mentioned, and let's just go back to, talking about sports as a genre for movies. I think we're going to talk about a lot of different things, definitely focus on the movies, but also, sports as it's used in media, sports as, TV shows or whatever we can come up with. But there certainly are enough sports related movies to discuss. And I'll let you take the lead on this, but my opinion of Miracle is, it's got to be in one of the top five of anybody's sports movies, uh, because it's just really good.
I think you're right. It's hard to dispute that, and I think it's a fascinating thing to watch the film in 2025. We're just a little over 2 decades after the movie's released.
Yeah,
And, you know, whether you consider yourself much of a patriot or not, the sense of patriotism that one feels when watching the film is intense at times.
yeah,
And I think it's hard to watch Miracle and not think about what's going on in the world at large, uh,
yeah.
because these are interesting times. And look, this isn't a political podcast. We're not going to get
No.
into the geopolitical situation all over the world. That's not what we're here to do. But then you look at what's going on in the world of hockey. You mentioned what happened just a few weeks ago. with the tournament.
Yeah.
U.S. played Canada. I was out with some friends that night, and the game was on. We watched the national anthem. It gets booed. And then what was it, like half a second after face-off, a fight breaks out,
Yeah, they started
and,
fighting. Yeah.
and then a
It was
minute
actually,
later,
yeah, yeah. Very interesting tournament. Very interesting. Obviously Canada's not happy with some of the stuff that's happening here in the States, but that, like you said, we're not here for that purpose at the end of the day. But you know what? Really, the truth be told, it really is part and parcel with the movie because at that time, now I was growing up at the time, I was only in my teens. But at the end of the day, it was a very serious time for America. We had a lot of things going on. We had the Iranian hostage crisis, which they touch on in the movie. We had the Cold War with the Russians. We had a president who was, many consider up until recently maybe one of the worst ever. I mean, again, not political, but the point is there was a lot happening at that time, and people in America, we were looking, this was a very tough time. We had again, you're too young to remember this, but we had the gas shortage. I worked at a gas station when I was in high school, and we had odd even days. You could only get gas if your plate was on even days, an even number, and odd days. These things were happening, and it was a very, very strange time and a very scary time. And at the end of the day, I don't know if you know this. I was thinking about this today, John. We all know the TV show, the Nightline news program, right?
Ted Koppel back in the day, right?
Yeah, right. But that didn't exist. That actually formed out of the Iranian hostage crisis because there was no news after the whatever the nightly news was over at 7 o'clock, whatever, until the next day. And they actually came on at 11 o'clock or whatever, maybe it was midnight. And now that's become a staple. But at the end of the day, that was born out of that Iranian hostage crisis. So a lot of background and a lot of backdrop to what was happening at that time. And again, the movie, I think it really captures it well. I, for one, I don't know how you feel. I think this is Kurt Russell's probably his best performance as an actor.
Hands down. Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Okay.
This and Tequila Sunrise, I think.
Okay.
It's toss up. No, seriously though, this is without a doubt, I
Overboard.
think
Overboard.
over, Overboard's pretty great.
It's a good
Um,
movie.
it's interesting because you, you look at this film, it's from 2004.
Yep.
It's when at that time, I mean, there was a lot going on with the United States and the world. I mean, we were still really in the shadows of 9/11 at that point, and there was the war in Iraq, and those were challenging times too.
Yeah.
And the film's set in 1980.
Right.
I keep going back to that game a few weeks ago, USA versus Canada. And these are our neighbors to the north, and while there's a little bit of rivalry, uh, they're supposed to be our friends. And
Yeah.
then you contrast that with USA versus the USSR in 1980, and you sense that there's at least the a little bit of civility and respect between the two teams that you're watching on film in
Yep.
1980.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and then you saw what you saw a couple weeks ago, and you're like, oh, how far have we fallen? Now, I think a lot of this might have to do with the fact, and again, I'm too young to remember this. You obviously remember this, but you can't ignore the fact that Miracle is a Disney film, right? Uh,
Correct.
and while I do love it, I think the fact that it's Disney or it had Disney involvement in the production, it does make it a little more family friendly than what really went on.
Well, probably.
Right. Right. I mean, look, you've got a group of 24 guys playing hockey in the early 20s.
Yeah.
Never once, and I watched it again, not quite 48 hours ago. Never once do we hear any of these guys cuss or swear.
Yeah. Well,
And
okay.
hello, where are the women? You mean to tell me that Jack O'Callahan and Mike Ramsey weren't hunting for snow bunnies in the Lake Placid Olympic Village? Come on.
Well,
There's got to be a
thankfully,
Disney
yeah.
agreement. Yeah.
Thankfully, they listen. I'm sure you're right. I'm sure that was something that they discussed. Like, okay, do we follow these guys off the ice? How far do we want to get into that stuff? But I think they did a good job showing just how serious like Herb Brooks, and and obviously Kurt Russell playing that role in terms of getting them to really focus on making the team. Which is a big part of the movie, right?
Sure.
And how he formed the team, and then how he drove them at the end of the day also. But there was something, when we talk about hockey, back at that time, the Russians, I mean, and they do obviously do a good deal of showing just how good the Russians were. Well, the Russians were basically a team of professionals.
Yep.
And that was the problem with everybody when we went to these Olympics, any Olympics, back before they allowed professional athletes, it was okay, we have our kids, our college kids playing against guys that are in the Russian army who were 25, 30 years old. These guys were legitimately a juggernaut. They were just an unbelievable team, an unbelievable so and if you remember even in the movie they touch on it, they go to Madison Square Garden and they get their asses kicked, the
Yeah.
US,
Sure.
and then so but in terms of the movie itself, the thing I like about the movie, John, is, and we'll get into this as this podcast progresses. Sometimes you watch a sports movie and you sit there and go, "This guy's not even an athlete." I mean, he doesn't even run like an athlete, he doesn't move like an athlete. These guys were, I mean, they really played the parts
Yeah.
well, all of them.
We did.
It was well
They
cast. Yeah,
incredibly well cast.
yeah,
And it was great to see them bring it to life. Um, you mentioned the Russians and just how unstoppable they
yeah,
were. And I think, you know, for younger folks out there, people a little younger than me, it's hard to imagine what the Iron Curtain was and what the Soviet Union was.
yeah,
But you had this Soviet machine, uh, and this team was just so damn talented and unstoppable. And they talk about this in the movie too, Dave, how just a year prior to the 1980 Olympic Games, the USSR faces and beats the NHL All-Star team.
right, right.
And that NHL All-Star team, I pulled the roster online earlier today.
Mm,
That's stacked with now NHL Hall of Famers. Ken Dryden, Guy Lafleur, Mike Bossy, Marcel Dion, Dennis Potvin. I can go on. These guys
mm.
were the best of that era.
Yeah,
And they're up against a bunch of Soviets who couldn't play in the United States. They couldn't leave the Soviet Union, really.
right.
They were confined to army barracks 10 months out of the year, thanks to Tikhonov, their coach.
Hmm.
And when they weren't in army barracks, the other 2 months they were probably living in those Khrushchevskas, those little like stone, very cold looking apartments that were all throughout Moscow and
Hmm.
the cities in Russia.
Hmm.
Uh, these guys weren't making a whole bunch of money. These guys were probably not making anything.
Hmm.
They weren't out partying and living the life like NHL players. They had nothing but the game, and they were playing for the pride of Mother Russia.
Hmm.
Um, and that was the intensity, the fierceness, the viciousness occasionally of the
Yeah,
Soviet machine. Um, when you look at it from that perspective, I think it makes the eventual US victory that much more amazing and exciting.
yeah. Well, when you actually, obviously having seen, lived through it when it actually happened and how people were reacting, I remember exactly where I was. It's one of those things where you know where you were when you found out because you remember a lot of those in this game. I think I was working at the time, so I didn't watch it live, but I don't think it was on live. I think they played it tape. I think they played it on tape delay later that night because I think they played in the afternoon, like Placid. So, But in terms of the movie itself, and they do such a good job, and it's probably worth watching a few times, a couple times, because they do touch on all of these things, just how good the Russians were, just how, how driven, the coach was. And obviously, if you put it together at the end there, where, at the end of the game, and he doesn't even realize, to pull the goalie because he's never had to do that before.
Right.
And Brooks says to Craig Patrick, on the back, he doesn't know what to do. And I mean, it's just amazing. And then obviously also having, the Al Michaels, Ken Dryden, come back and re kind of capture, what they did live for the movie. It's really well done. I mean, across the board, just really well done.
It's moving too,
Yeah.
it
Oh
really
God,
is.
yeah.
And I think it's moving in a way that other sports films aren't. That's not to say that other sports movies haven't moved me, but there's so much more to this. And I think nostalgia is a very powerful thing. And I think there's a sense of nostalgia to a bygone era that a lot of people feel when they're watching this film.
Yeah.
Even someone like myself, who wasn't quite 3 years old when the Miracle on Ice happened, but growing up, it's all you heard about.
Yeah.
And it was such a big to do. And I think it's easily forgotten these days by a younger generation who just doesn't realize how significant, how important this was, both on an athletic and a sports level, but also the face of politics and the face of
Yeah.
culture at that time.
Well, I think that's why the movie is so important, John. I think because it captures it so well that it's almost like it does give you that historical kind of reference. And so when you watch it, whether you're a kid in high school or whatever, and you go, this is pretty cool that these things happen, and another thing is, and I know you know this, but just for our audience, I'm sure most people do know this, Herb Brooks, was alive when they were filming this, when they were putting this together, but he died in a car accident before it was released. So he never got to see it. And of course, at the end of the movie, they say, he didn't get to see this, but he lived it, which is really just a nice testament to him, really. You
He's a
know.
fascinating character when
Yeah.
you read up on Herb Brooks. Um, and uh, everything I've read, they say that Russell captures him perfectly.
Yeah.
Um, every different aspect of Herb Brooks, but had quite the career as a player. What was the story? He got cut from,
He was the final cut. Yep.
missed the final cut of the 1960 Olympic
Yep.
team.
Yep.
But then his post 1980 Olympic career was kind of up and down. He was all over the place in terms of where he coached, what he did. At one point, he was working for or about to work for Jostens, which does personalized college and high school class rings. Did you hear this story?
No.
Like, yeah, there's a lot of interesting things to Herb Brooks. He was when he took the position to as head coach for, what was it, the 2002 um, Winter Olympics hockey team, because they brought him back, the US
Yeah.
did. He tried to get the NHL to not play the All-Star game that year
Mm.
because he thought it was going to interfere with all things related to the 2002 Olympics. So just when you read into him, I mean, a
Yeah.
really, really fascinating character. And I think, you touched on this a minute ago. The way Kurt Russell portrays him is just incredible because he's almost this, at least the way he's portrayed in the film by Kurt Russell, it's almost this tortured individual
Yeah.
who I feel like is plagued by a little bit of self-doubt.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and it would be very easy if he just played him as, the tough as nails coach, pushing everyone to the limit, beyond the limit, really.
Mm.
Um, but there are moments where Russell plays him as kind of this nuanced, intriguing character, and it takes you on this crazy ride. What amazes me, you never feel fully confident in the team at any point in the movie till close to the very end, because I don't think Brooks feels 100% confident in the team winning till
Mm,
close to the very end. And that's the beauty of the way Kurt Russell plays this character.
yeah,
You see the expression on his face change at this very specific moment. I think it's between the second and third period when they're playing the Soviets. And all of a sudden, there's this sense of like, okay, they're going to win this. Comes over
yeah.
him and comes over all of us. It's a beautiful moment, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And the interesting thing is obviously, in the movie they kind of gloss over, the big thing was obviously playing the Russians. That was the theme throughout the whole movie, playing the Russians, beating the Russians. And, but that wasn't even people don't realize, some people don't realize that was not the gold medal game. And then even in the movie, it's kind of like an afterthought. Oh, and then by the way, we went on to win the gold medal game. I can remember being in church that day because it was on a Sunday, and the priest saying something about hope praying for the Olympic hockey team, and it's funny because um, God forbid if they had lost that game, the gold medal game, then it all goes out the window. The beating the Russians meant nothing. So, but in terms of the movie itself. Um, Obviously, like I said, it was well done in terms of the skaters and the players and obviously the coaches and even the trainer, just the time frame. I think they did a wonderful job of just really representing what those guys meant really to that game and to that gold medal team. So, and we've had on, this on our Clubhouse radio show, we've had on Mike Ruzioni and Jim Craig, and both of them, really thought, usually sometimes when there's a movie about somebody who is being depicted, they go, well, that's not really what happened, but they both thought that it was really well done. So that's even more credit to them for doing a great job.
So you just mentioned someone, and so my father, as I think you know, is from southern Italy.
Hmm.
And when he came to this country in the late 1950s, my father ended up in Boston, which is rare because most Italians who immigrated that during that time, they ended up in New York and New Jersey. How he ended up in Boston, that's a whole other story.
Boston's got a good Italian section, no doubt.
Yeah, North End is fantastic.
Hmm.
Hanover Street is still great.
Hmm.
So both Italy and Boston have played an integral part of my upbringing, I guess you could say. I was
Hmm.
born in Boston, but we moved out of there when I was a year old. But the 1980 U.S. hockey team is the stuff of legend in my family, and
Okay.
it was talked about regularly when I was growing up. Not because we defeated the Soviets, not because it's one of the greatest, if not the greatest underdog story in sports history, not because of the incredible goaltending skills of Jim Craig, but because of an Italian kid from Winthrop, Massachusetts, some 20 minutes outside of
Yeah.
Boston, named Mike Aruzioni,
Hmm.
the captain of the team.
Hmm.
Anytime over the course of the last 4 decades plus, when the conversation at holidays or family dinners has turned to the Miracle on Ice, the conversation inevitably, Dave, turns to Mike Ruzioni.
Yep.
It was a god in my family growing up, second only to Phil Esposito of the
Yeah.
Boston
All
Bruins.
right.
Like that. So I just had to make that shout out. I
No.
can't state just how significant and how that name was ingrained in my
Yeah.
psyche at the time I was, 3 years
Yeah.
old.
We've had him on actually two times, and he's a really nice guy and just a smart guy. And actually, in the movie, it actually that is the pivoting point of the whole movie. It's really when they're doing those suicides on the ice in Norway, and
Yeah.
And he's looking for them to come together as a team. He doesn't want to hear, what school you played for. And when Mike Ruiz, just yells out, Mike Ruizioni, went to Massachusetts. Who do you play for? I play for the United States of America. And that was it. That was Herb Brooks knows. That's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, it's
That's
an
enough,
incredible
gentlemen.
movie.
And just an awesome scene with that. Again. Again, yeah, great movie. All right, so it's time of the show, and this is up to you. We can grade our movies 1 to 10 or 8, or we can do the academic scale A B C D. Up to you, John.
I think because people might not, or they may know this, is that both you and I have affiliations in the world of academia,
Okay,
particularly higher ed. I think we have to go with the grading scale.
okay, I agree.
So I'm going A minus on this.
Okay, interesting.
The
All right.
the movie, as I said, it moved me incredibly. Uh, Seeing it again just a couple days ago for the first time in so many years, I think I enjoyed it even more. It only lost a couple of points because I do feel the Disneyfication of it at times.
Okay.
And the only other minor complaint, and this is the music snob in me, and the music aficionado. I mean, God, the movie's set in 1980. It should have had a killer soundtrack. Uh,
Oh,
and I think the only song that I took out of listening to, watching it this past time around, was Must Have Got Lost by Jay Giles Band, which is in there, which I love.
okay.
Uh, they could have thrown in a few more great 1980s classics. I'm not saying we should have Captain and Tennille, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, that should have been really 70s if you think about it, because
Yeah.
they played if they were playing in February 1980.
Yeah, so
So
79,
probably
80.
more late 70s, yeah. So, but it's a valid, listen, that's a really well thought out grade. You're A minus. I'm gonna go A. I won't go A plus, but I'll go A. I do think it's a great movie, and I think they do cover a lot of the aspects of what really transpired there. So that's very good.
Terrific.
All right. So is there anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Watch Miracle, folks.
Yeah,
Uh,
watch it and watch it with a keen eye, and then because it's a good movie. So before we sign off, I'd like to invite people to listen to our theme song, which we had played the instrumental as we started, but we'll sign off with this theme song, which I think captures exactly what we're going to be doing with this podcast.
it sure does. I'm looking forward to many more of these, Dave.
All right, John. Thanks, brother.
Thank you.